Ethan Ward had always been a simple cowboy, the kind who woke up before sunrise, saddled his horse without a word, and worked until the sky turned dark again. People in the small rural town often said Ethan was calm like a still pond and steady like the old mountains around them. He rarely spoke more than he had to, never rushed, and never caused trouble. He was respected by ranchers, trusted by neighbors, and admired by younger cowhands who wished they had even half his patience. His friends noticed first. He would forget small things, like where he left his gloves or which fence line he was supposed to check. During lunch breaks, while the others laughed and told stories, Ethan would stare at the open fields with distant eyes, as if searching for something no one else could see. If someone called his name twice, he would blink and act as though he had just woken up from a dream. The older ranch hands teased him, saying he must be in love. But Ethan only shook his head and rode off again, pretending their words meant nothing. The truth was something he never admitted out loud. His mind was stuck, completely stuck on a woman he had met only once. Her name was Lena Brooks. She didn't grow up in this dusty part of the world. She wasn't used to horses, rough roads, or long days under the sun. She had come to the countryside only to visit her aunt for a short stay, planning to return to the city as soon as the visit was over. But during those days, something unexpected had happened. It began with a broken gate. Ethan had been repairing the old wooden frame near the Brooks farm. It was supposed to be quick work, something he could finish in a few hours. But the wood was old, the nails bent too easily, and the wind kept blowing dust into his eyes. Then, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw her Lena standing there with a pair of work gloves in her hand and a bright, friendly smile that reached her eyes. She had asked if he needed help. Ethan almost said no, not wanting to trouble her. But before he could answer, Lena had already stepped forward, holding a plank steady while he hammered. She was not used to the work. Her hands were soft, and her stance wasn't strong at first, but she tried with such honest effort that Ethan couldn't help but admire her. She laughed when she made mistakes, apologized whenever she dropped a nail, and kept the mood warm the entire time. They didn't talk much, but her presence filled the quiet space in a way he had never experienced before. When the gate was finally fixed, she thanked him and wiped dust from her cheek with the back of her hand. Ethan remembered every small detail, the way the sunlight caught her hair, the gentle rise of her breath after working hard, the simple kindness in her voice. They parted that day, thinking it was the end. She left the countryside soon after, returning to her busy city life, and Ethan returned to his everyday routine. But something had changed inside him. No matter how many days passed, her image followed him everywhere. While riding across open fields, he would remember her laugh. While feeding the horses, he would think about the way she had looked at him with bright curiosity. When he lay down at night, the memory of her voice echoed softly in his mind. It didn't make sense. He had barely spoken to her, barely knew her, and yet she lived in his thoughts as if she had always belonged there. Ethan tried everything to distract himself. He worked longer hours, repaired every fence on the ranch twice, volunteered to help neighbors, and rode far into the hills, hoping the wide sky would clear his mind. But nothing worked. The more he tried to forget, the clearer her memory became. Even the silence around him wasn't the same anymore. It felt filled with things he couldn't say out loud. At first, he thought it was foolish. Cowboys didn't fall in love this easily. They were supposed to be tough, grounded, and practical. And besides, Lena was from a different world. She had dreams of city lights, tall buildings, and fast-paced life. Ethan had dirt roads, cattle, and endless fields. What chance did they have? He convinced himself that she would never think of him again. Still, his heart refused to agree. There were mornings when he woke up feeling restless, unsure why he felt so empty. His friends asked if he was tired, but Ethan always shook his head. He didn't know how to explain that it wasn't his body that was tired, it was his heart. He felt like he was walking around with a part of himself missing, something he couldn't describe but could feel deeply every single day. One afternoon, while riding along the fence line, Ethan stopped his horse at the top of a small hill. The wind brushed against his hat. The sky stretched wide and endless, and the land below rolled out like a painting. Usually, such a view calmed him. But that day, it only made him feel more lost. He wondered if Lena ever thought about him. Did she remember the day they fixed the gate together? Did she ever smile at the memory the way he did? Or had she moved on completely? He tried not to hope, but hope lived inside him anyway. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slipped slowly into months. And still, Ethan could not shake the pull he felt toward her. He didn't talk about it to anyone, not even his closest friend. He carried it quietly, the way cowboys often carried their feelings deep, hidden, unspoken. Then, one cold morning, something unexpected happened. Ethan was saddling his horse behind the barn, lost in thought, tying the strap with slow hands. The sky was painted pink and gold, and the air smelled like fresh hay. He didn't hear footsteps at first. He didn't realize anyone was behind him until a soft voice broke the silence. "Ethan?" He froze. That voice, he knew it instantly. He had heard it in his dreams, in his memories, in every quiet moment when he wished she were near. He turned around slowly. There she was. Lena Brooks stood at the ranch gate, holding a small bag, dust on her boots, and a warm, hopeful expression on her face. She looked slightly tired from traveling, but her eyes were still gentle, the same eyes that had stayed with him for months. Ethan couldn't speak. For a long moment, he didn't even breathe. He simply stared, wondering if he was imagining her again. But she smiled softly, proving she was real. "I came back," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "My aunt needs help for a few weeks." Ethan's heart thumped loudly in his chest, but he nodded, trying to keep calm. He didn't want her to see how deeply her return affected him. But Lena saw more than he realized. She noticed the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes shifted like he was hiding something. She walked closer, her boots crunching softly on the ground. "You look different," she said gently. "More distant. More lost." Ethan lowered his gaze, pretending he was busy with his saddle. He didn't trust himself to answer. He feared that if he opened his mouth, everything inside him would spill out. But Lena wasn't one to ignore things easily. She tilted her head and studied him with quiet curiosity. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "Just busy. Lots of work." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push either. Instead, she gave a small smile, the kind that made his chest ache with something warm and unfamiliar. "It's good to see you again," she said softly. And just like that, she walked toward the farmhouse, leaving Ethan standing in silence, unable to move. His heart raced, his thoughts tangled. For months he had tried to forget her, and now she was back real, close, and smiling at him like no time had passed. But she had also asked a question he didn't know how to answer. Why did he look so lost? He knew the truth. Because for months, his mind had been on her. Because he had been wandering through life with her memory as his only guide. Because no matter how far he rode, her face always found him in the quiet. But Ethan wasn't ready to admit any of that. Not yet. Not when he wasn't sure if she felt the same. So he pulled his hat low, tightened the saddle, and took a deep breath, hoping he could survive the days ahead without letting his heart show too much. But deep inside, he already knew one thing for certain. Lena Brooks had returned, and nothing in his quiet cowboy life would ever be the same again. Lena's unexpected return changed more in Ethan's life than he wanted to admit. Even though he tried to act calm, something inside him had started beating with new energy. Something he thought he had buried months ago. He kept telling himself it was only temporary, that she was here only for a few weeks to help her aunt. After that, she would return to the city, and he would go back to his quiet life on the ranch. But deep inside, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Her presence alone filled the air around him with warmth he had been missing for too long. In the first few days of her return, Ethan tried to keep his distance. He thought if he stayed busy enough, he would avoid getting too attached. He started waking even earlier, doing extra chores before anyone else was awake. He volunteered to check the farthest fields, and made sure he spent most of his afternoons riding along the outer fences where no one usually went. But Lena noticed his absence, more than he expected. Every time Ethan came near the farmhouse, she seemed to appear out of nowhere with a smile, a question, or something she wanted help with. Her aunt's farm needed real work. One of the barns had a leaning wall, the roof had a small leak, and several fence posts had grown crooked over the years. Lena insisted on doing everything she could to help, even when the tasks were heavier than she was used to. Ethan watched from a distance at first, confused by how determined she was. She wasn't raised to handle rough work, but she didn't complain even once. She tied her hair back, put on gloves, and faced each task with a strong spirit that impressed him more with every passing hour. One morning, Ethan finally gave in and walked over to help her carry a heavy wooden plank. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her smile came naturally so warm and familiar that Ethan felt something inside him tighten. "I thought you were avoiding me," she teased lightly, but her eyes were soft, not accusing. Ethan shook his head, pretending he hadn't understood the deeper meaning behind her words. "Just busy," he said, adjusting his hat as if the sun was too bright. Lena didn't argue. Instead, she handed him one end of the plank and began walking toward the barn with the other end. They worked in quiet, lifting, moving, hammering, and adjusting until the barn wall stood straight again. Lena's face glowed with sweat, but she laughed every time something went wrong and encouraged Ethan to laugh too. Somehow, she made even hard work feel gentle. After finishing the barn, they sat on overturned buckets to rest for a moment. Lena wiped her forehead with her sleeve and looked at Ethan with thoughtful eyes. "You know," she said softly, "you look different these days." Ethan tensed. "Different how?" "More far away," she replied. "Like your body is here, but your heart is wandering somewhere else." Her words felt too close to the truth. Ethan lowered his gaze, staring at the dust near his boots. "I'm fine," he said quietly. But Lena shook her head. "Ethan, you don't have to pretend with me." He opened his mouth to reply, but just then, her aunt called for help from inside the house, interrupting the moment. Lena stood up quickly, brushing dust off her jeans. "Duty calls," she said with a grin. "Don't run off too far. I still need help fixing the fence." Ethan watched her jog toward the house, her ponytail bouncing behind her. He breathed in slowly, trying to calm the mix of relief and disappointment swirling in his chest. Her words stayed with him long after she disappeared from sight. "You don't have to pretend with me." No one had ever said something like that to him. Most people never expected him to open up. They accepted his quiet nature and didn't look beyond the surface. But Lena did. She looked at him like she could read every small detail he tried to hide. Throughout the next few days, she made a habit of pulling Ethan into her tasks. Sometimes, she asked for help fixing a fence. Other times, she wanted him to show her how to lead a skittish horse. Once, she asked him to help her plant new seeds in the garden, even though Ethan knew she could do it alone. Her requests were never demanding. They were simply gentle ways of keeping him close without making it obvious. Ethan noticed something else, too. Lena wasn't just helping her aunt. She was trying to reconnect with the land. She liked the slow pace, the fresh air, the simple calm of the countryside. When she walked through the fields, she looked peaceful. When she fed the chickens or swept the barn floor, she looked almost happy. It made Ethan wonder if the city really did suit her the way he always believed. One evening, After the day's chores were done, Ethan found himself riding by the creek. The water shimmered in the fading light, and the air smelled like clean grass. As he rode closer to the bend in the creek, he saw someone sitting on a rock with their feet in the water. It was Lena. She looked up when she heard his horse and smiled. "Hey, Cowboy," she called out. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Four. Four." Ethan dismounted slowly, unsure if he was intruding. "Didn't know anyone else came out this far." "I needed a quiet place to think," she replied, dipping her toes back into the water. "This spot feels peaceful." Ethan stood beside his horse, feeling strangely nervous. He wasn't used to spending quiet moments with someone else, but Lena patted the rock beside her, inviting him to sit. After a moment of hesitation, he joined her, leaving a careful distance between them. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft rush of the water. The sky glowed orange and pink, and the gentle wind brushed against the trees. Lena let out a small sigh. "You know," she said slowly, "I didn't come back only because my aunt needed help." Ethan turned his head slightly. "No?" She shook her head. "I needed a break. A real one. Life in the city was loud, rushed, crowded. I kept thinking about how peaceful it felt out here." Ethan listened quietly. "And," she continued, "I kept thinking about you." His heart almost stopped. He looked at her sharply, unsure if he heard her correctly. Lena smiled softly, not embarrassed, not shy, just honest. "You were different from anyone I met. Kind, patient, quiet, but in a warm way. I don't know. The memory stayed with me." Ethan swallowed. For a moment, he didn't trust his voice. "I didn't think you'd remember," he said finally. Lena raised an eyebrow. "How could I forget you? You helped me without asking for anything. You listened when I talked. You didn't treat me like an outsider. People don't forget kindness that easily." You know, he didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Like his quiet nature was something good, something valuable. But before he could answer, Lena leaned back slightly, her hands resting beside her on the rock. "Ethan," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" He nodded slowly. "When I saw you the day I returned, you looked lost." Her voice was gentle, not accusing. "Your eyes kept drifting away, even when I talked to you." She paused, studying him. "Cowboy, is your mind always on me? Is that why you look so lost out here?" The question hit him harder than he expected. His chest tightened. For a moment, the world felt too still, too open, too honest. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't know if he should. The truth was sitting right there inside his heart, clear as day. Yes, his mind had been on her. Yes, he felt lost because of her absence. Yes, he had thought about her every single day since she left. But the words tangled in his throat. He lowered his gaze. "Lena, I..." Before he could finish, they heard her aunt calling from the distant farmhouse, her voice faint but urgent enough to interrupt the moment. Lena sighed, sliding her feet out of the water. "We should go," she said quietly. Ethan nodded, feeling like something important had been left hanging in the air between them. As Lena headed back toward the house, Ethan stayed behind for a moment, staring at the water flowing past. Her question echoed inside him, deeper and deeper. Was his mind always on her? He already knew the answer, but he wasn't sure he was brave enough to say it out loud. The days that followed the moment by the creek grew heavier for Ethan than he expected. Every time he saw Lena, the memory of her question played again and again in his mind. "Cowboy, is your mind always on me?" He couldn't push it away. He kept replaying the sound of her voice, the soft look in her eyes, the way she waited for his answer before the moment was interrupted. He wished he had spoken the truth right then, but the words had stuck in his throat like dry dust. Now, every time she walked by him, every time she smiled, every time she laughed at something small, Ethan felt that same tightness in his chest. He tried to act normal, tried to keep his distance, but his eyes always drifted toward her, no matter how hard he fought it. Lena, on the other hand, didn't seem to be avoiding anything. She didn't act embarrassed, didn't act confused, didn't pretend the moment by the creek hadn't happened. If anything, she grew even more comfortable around Ethan. She asked him more questions, talked to him more freely, and spent more time near him, sometimes helping with work, sometimes just standing beside him as he tightened saddle straps or oiled saddle leather. It felt natural, warm, comforting, yet every second made Ethan feel his hidden feelings more strongly. One afternoon, they were repairing the fence line that ran along a quiet stretch of land. The sun sat high in the sky, and the fields shimmered with heat. Lena helped by holding the boards straight while Ethan hammered them into place. She worked carefully, watching his every move. When he stepped back to check the alignment, she smiled. "Look at that. We're getting good at this." Ethan nodded, but his mind wasn't on the fence. It was on the way her eyes shone in the sunlight. The quiet confidence she carried now. The steady presence she had brought into his life without even trying. He tried to focus on the fence, but she kept catching him glancing at her. "You okay?" she asked softly. Ethan cleared his throat. "Fine. You say that a lot," she said with a knowing smile. He didn't answer. He went back to hammering the nails. But his movements weren't steady anymore. His fingers slipped, and the hammer hit the wood awkwardly. Lena's hand gently touched his arm. "Ethan, talk to me." But he shook his head, stepping back slightly. "I don't want to say the wrong thing." Her smile softened. Sometimes, the only wrong thing is saying nothing at all. Those words struck him deeper than the hammer ever could. Later that day, they rode out toward the far pasture to check on the cattle. Lena rode a gentle brown mare, while Ethan rode his trusted horse, Dusty. The trail was narrow and dusty, winding between tall grass and small hills. The air was warm, but a soft breeze helped cool their faces. Lena rode beside him, sometimes falling behind when the mare slowed down, sometimes riding ahead with a playful grin. At one point, they stopped at the top of a hill, and Lena looked down at the wide land below them. The view stretched far fields, fences, the creek, the sky blending into one soft horizon. "It's beautiful out here," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan nodded. "I come here when I need to think." She turned to him, her eyes curious. "Have you been thinking a lot lately?" He felt his heart jump. She wasn't letting the question go. Maybe she didn't want him to hide anymore. Maybe she needed to hear the truth. But Ethan wasn't ready. The words still felt heavy. So instead, he nudged Dusty forward and said, "Let's check the southern herd before it gets dark." Lena didn't push. She simply followed him down the hill, though he noticed her expression had turned thoughtful, like she was trying to piece something together. As the sun lowered in the sky, clouds gathered on the horizon. The breeze grew stronger. Ethan knew a storm was coming. He wanted to finish quickly. But halfway across the pasture, the wind shifted, and a crack of distant thunder made their horses tense. Ethan looked at the sky and frowned. "We need to head back," he said firmly. Another low rumble rolled across the hills. Lena looked worried but nodded. They turned their horses around and rode toward an old wooden shed nearby, the closest shelter, until the storm passed. The first drops of rain fell before they reached it. By the time they arrived, the wind had picked up, scattering dust and leaves across the ground. Ethan helped Lena step down from her horse and guided her into the shed. Rain began to pour within seconds, loud and heavy, hammering against the wooden roof. The shed was small, just big enough for two people to stand without rubbing shoulders. The air between them felt thick, filled with everything unspoken. Lena hugged her arms around herself, brushing rainwater from her hair. "Well," she said with a small laugh, "this was not in the plan." Ethan smiled slightly. Lightning flashed outside, followed by a deep roll of thunder. Lena flinched a little, and Ethan instinctively stepped closer, just enough to make sure she felt safe without overwhelming her. For a few moments, they stood in silence, listening to the rain crash against the world outside. Then, Lena turned her head, her expression soft and open. "Ethan, can we talk about that day? By the creek?" The creek?" His breath caught. He knew this moment would come eventually, but the storm made everything feel more intense, more emotional. "I asked you something," she continued gently, "but you never answered." Ethan swallowed. "I wasn't asking to make you uncomfortable," she said in a soothing tone. "I just wanted to understand what was going on inside you. You seemed so far away when I returned, and it felt like something was bothering you." Ethan looked down at the dirt floor. He felt the truth sitting heavy in his chest, waiting to be spoken. Lena stepped a little closer. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not trying to push you into anything. Stess. I'm not. Stess." He finally lifted his eyes to hers. They were calm, warm, patient, giving him space, but encouraging him at the same time. Ethan took a slow breath. "Lena, I've been thinking about you. A lot. More than I should have." Lena's eyes softened instantly, as though she had been expecting that answer but needed to hear it from him. "When you left," he continued, "I thought you'd forget about that day we fixed the gate. But I didn't. Every day, I kept remembering things you said, the way you laughed. Even small things, like how you wiped dust off your face." He looked away, embarrassed. "It sounds foolish now that I say it out loud." "It's not foolish," Lena whispered. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I didn't know if it was just me feeling that way. I didn't want to believe it mattered that much. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep myself busy, but it didn't go away." Lena stepped closer again, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "I didn't forget either." Ethan's eyes snapped to hers, surprised. She smiled gently. "When I went back to the city, I thought I would slip back into my old routine. But I couldn't stop thinking about this place. And about you. I didn't tell anyone, because I didn't understand it myself at first." Ethan felt his heartbeat pounding. "You thought about me? More than I should have," she said softly, mirroring his earlier words. They stood only a few inches apart now, the sound of rain muffling the world outside. Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him, like everything he had held inside was finally allowed to breathe. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "Scared that if I said something, you'd leave again, and it would hurt more." Lena reached up and touched his arm with gentle fingers. "Ethan, I didn't come back to disappear again. I came because this place means something to me. And you mean something too." His breath shook slightly as he let out a slow exhale. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel lost. He felt seen, fully, clearly, deeply. The rain softened outside, turning from heavy drops to a light drizzle. But neither of them moved. The air between them felt peaceful, warm, like a gentle fire. Lena looked up at him with a small, hopeful smile. "So, where do we go from here?" Ethan didn't have all the answers. But for once, he wasn't afraid of the question. He wasn't afraid to take a step forward. "We go wherever we need to," he said softly. "Together, if you want that." "I do," she whispered. The storm had passed, but inside that small wooden shed, something new had begun. Quiet, steady, honest. The kind of beginning that didn't rush or force itself, The kind of beginning that grew naturally, like sunlight rising over the fields. Ethan no longer felt like a lost cowboy wandering through empty days. Now he felt like a man who finally knew where his heart wanted to be. The days after the storm felt different for both Ethan and Lena. Something quiet but strong had changed between them inside that old wooden shed. They didn't rush anything. They didn't speak too boldly. And they didn't make big promises. But every moment they shared now carried a gentle warmth, as if both hearts finally recognized each other without fear. Ethan felt lighter than he had in months, and Lena felt more at peace than she had expected when she returned to the countryside. Still, life went on around them. There were chores to finish, animals to care for, fields to check, and fences to repair. But now, the work didn't feel heavy. Ethan and Lena naturally fell into a rhythm, helping each other, sharing quiet moments, sometimes working side by side without speaking at all. And yet, even in silence, there was a sense of connection, a sense that words were no longer needed every second. Every morning, Lena greeted Ethan with a bright smile, and every afternoon, Ethan found himself looking for her before he planned anything. They rode together more often, checked the fields as a pair, and spent evenings on the porch drinking lemonade or tea while watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The land felt more alive, the sky looked more colorful, and the world around them seemed softer because they now carried each other's presence with them. But despite all the comforting moments, a quiet worry lingered in Ethan's mind. Lena's return was temporary, he knew that. Her aunt was recovering well, and soon she would no longer need help on the farm. The city would call Lena back, with its fast pace, bright lights, and responsibilities. Ethan didn't want to be selfish. He didn't want to ask her to stay, if staying meant giving up her own dreams. So he kept his worry quietly tucked behind his smile, hoping it wouldn't show. Lena, however, was not blind. She had come to understand Ethan well enough to read the small changes in his posture. The way his eyes grew distant sometimes, or the way he paused before answering certain questions. One afternoon, while cleaning the barn, she watched him from the corner of her eye. He was brushing his horse, slow and thoughtful, lost in his own head. "You're thinking too hard again," she said softly. Ethan looked up, surprised. "Am I?" She walked closer, dusting her hands on her jeans. Ethan hesitated. "It's nothing." Lena stepped closer, her eyes gentle. "Ethan, after everything we shared, please don't shut me out now." He looked at her hands, then at the ground, then finally at her face. "I don't want to lose this," he said quietly. "But I know you have your own life back in the city. I don't want to hold you back. 40. I. Lena's expression softened deeply. She placed her hand on his forearm. "You're not holding me back. You're grounding me. You're giving me something real." Ethan's breath caught slightly. She squeezed his arm before stepping back with a soft smile. "Let's talk later," she said. "After dinner. On the hill." Ethan nodded, though a quiet nervousness rose inside him. That evening, the sky was painted in soft pink and gold as they walked up the hill. Lena carried a light jacket draped over her arm, and Ethan walked with his hands in his pockets, trying to steady his heartbeat. When they reached the top, the view stretched out before them like a painting fields glowing in golden light, trees swaying in a gentle breeze, and the quiet hum of crickets beginning their song. Lena sat on the grass, and Ethan joined her. For a moment, they just watched the sky, letting the calm settle around them. Then, Lena took a slow breath. "My aunt is getting better," she said softly. Ethan's chest tightened. "I'm glad. She doesn't need me like before." Lena continued, her voice steady. "Soon, I'll be able to go back to my old life." Silence stretched between them, thick but not cold. Ethan nodded, trying to find words. "I don't want to stop you from going," he said slowly. "I know you have dreams, work, goals, a whole life waiting. Lena turned to face him. Do you think I want that life more than this one? Ethan's eyes lifted. I don't know. I don't want to assume. She gave a small, gentle smile. Ethan, the city is familiar, yes. But it doesn't give me peace. It doesn't give me calm. It doesn't make me feel the way I feel here. She touched her chest lightly. It doesn't make me feel grounded, safe, understood. Ethan swallowed, unsure what to say. Lena leaned toward him just slightly. You make me feel those things. His breath trembled with emotion he couldn't hide. I came back to help my aunt, she said. But I stayed because something in my heart told me I needed to understand why I kept thinking about you. Now I know. She reached for his hand slowly, giving him a chance to pull away if he wanted. He didn't. I want to stay, she whispered. Not because I'm running away from something, but because I'm running toward something. Toward us. Ethan felt his entire world shift in that moment. The weight that had been sitting on his chest for days suddenly lifted, replaced by something warm, hopeful, and unbelievably real. You'd stay? He asked quietly, almost unbelieving. If you want me to, she said with a soft smile. Ethan exhaled, emotion rising in a way he wasn't used to showing. Lena, I've never wanted something more. She squeezed his hand gently. Then, I'm staying. The evening breeze brushed past them, carrying the scent of wild grass and warm soil. A soft calm settled around them, as if the land itself was welcoming the beginning of something new. From that day forward, things fell into place with quiet ease. Lena moved into her aunt's farmhouse permanently, planning to help with the land and slowly build a new life in the countryside. She began learning more about the ranch work, finding joy in the simplest tasks, feeding animals, planting seeds, or riding alongside Ethan across wide-open fields. Ethan found himself smiling more, speaking more, and opening up in ways he never imagined. Lena's presence had a way of calming him and giving him strength. She taught him that vulnerability didn't mean weakness, and he taught her that quiet moments were sometimes more meaningful than loud ones. Work continued as usual, but now with laughter, shared looks, and gentle conversations woven into the days. The townsfolk noticed the change in Ethan, too. They saw the way his eyes brightened when Lena walked into a room, the way he stood a little taller, and the way his once distant expression was now filled with something warm and clear. One morning, months after the storm, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun slowly rise above the hills. Ethan reached for Lena's hand, and she leaned gently against him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The calm around them, the glow of the sunrise, and the quiet beat of their hearts said everything. The cowboy who once wandered, lost across endless fields, no longer felt directionless, and the woman who once struggled to find peace in the city now felt more at home than ever before. Together, they had built something simple, real, and enduring, something that felt like a steady promise carried by the land itself. Their story didn't end with grand declarations or sudden twists. Instead, it settled into a gentle truth. Sometimes, the heart finds its way only when two wandering souls finally stop running and decide to walk forward together.